Hi everyone. One second. Sorry, I'm the one clicking all the buttons and trying to set myself up. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Lukas Peterzak. Like I said earlier this morning, I have the honor and pleasure of serving as the program director for partnerships and campaigns for Next Century Cities. As I said earlier, I have been with the organization for about 2 years now. It'll be 2 years in August. And over those 2 years, I have had a real honor of getting to hear from local leaders like the two you're going to hear from today, who bring us real stories of what's happening in their community. Specifically, over the last 18 months, if you have been paying attention, municipal leaders from communities of all sizes from coast to coast have rapidly had to adjust to sort of this new system of life from home. Overnight, schools, public meetings, and government services switched to a completely remote position. For these leaders, one goal remains paramount: the continuity of services for every resident, regardless of connectivity status. However, with millions of Americans still disconnected, as we've been discussing all day, this was not an easy task. The two leaders joining us today serve as the chief executives of their communities and have faced this challenge head on. Luckily, we are seeing a transition back to open for the vast majority of the country, but even as Americans are vaccinated against COVID-19 and as life returns to normal, their work will continue. The digital divide existed long before COVID-19, and we know that sadly it will persist for many more years to come. Today, we'll spend some time discussing how the lessons learned from the pandemic must inform our work going forward. We have seen an unprecedented amount of attention on broadband and connectivity during the last year, and we cannot let that passion and momentum vanish. Our first panelist joining us today is Mayor Mary Casillas Salas of Chula Vista, California. She was elected to the Chula Vista City Council in 1996 and reelected in 2000. In 2004, she served as the first Latina Sweetwater Authority Director. In 2006, she was elected to the California State Assembly and served in that body until 2010. She returned to the City Council in 2012, and in 2014, she made history as the first elected Latina mayor in the county of San Diego. She has also led a 2-cent sales tax measure, Measure P, in 2016, that rebuilt aging infrastructure, and Measure A in 2018 that allowed her government to hire more police and fire personnel. Our second panelist is Gary Larrowe. He's the county administrator of Boutetort County, Virginia, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. I practiced, Gary, and I'm a Virginian, so I'm a little disappointed if I got it wrong.
Boutetort.
Boutetort?
Boutetort.
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 I will get it by the end of the panel, I promise. Laro has been the county administrator for 5 years, where his work with the community partners revitalized economic opportunities. During the COVID-19 pandemic, his leadership enabled broadband partnerships, and the county was able to leverage CARES Act funding and state support for further deployment for furtherance to reach their goal of 100% countywide connectivity. He also previously worked for Carroll County, where he served as county administrator since 2005. Thank you so much both for joining us today during this important conversation. I want to start the conversation with first getting to learn a little bit more about your communities. We obviously have 220 members across the country, and each one is very special and unique. So Mayor Salas, if you would like to start us, and then Administrator Laro, you can follow her.
Sure. Well, I'm always proud to talk about the city of Chula Vista since I was born here many, many years ago, and my grandparents actually moved to Chula Vista in 1919 from Mexico. And so I've really watched this community grow and expand. When I was born here, we had a population of about 15,000, and now we're nearing nearly 300,000 people in residence. And a lot of that growth occurred during the 25 years that I've been involved with the city. It's a very diverse population. We are over 50% Latino. That wasn't always a fact, but the demographic change within our community. Now we're a majority Latino community, but we're so diverse. We have a great Filipino population, as well as some African American. So, and you know, just a mixture of all kinds of cultures here in our beautiful city. We're 7 miles north of the Tijuana border, and so that presents a lot of challenges, but it also presents a lot of opportunity for a cross-border economy. I'm really proud to be, involved in the city because, we're a city that actually adopted our first climate action plan in the year 2000. So we were first in San Diego County to be thinking about sustainability. And that's how we built out our neighborhoods. It's a new city, it's an old city. And so the old city, the west of the 805, presented challenges relative to infrastructure. The newer cities, we were really great in installing fiber optics and having greenfield development that we could plan for a modern city. So those are the challenges that we have. It's a tale of two cities. I don't know what else you want to know about it other than it's a dynamic place that we've got a bayfront that's going to be developed. It's 500 acres of land on the coast, and it's the largest development on the West Coast. And we are just breaking grounds on a convention center and a hotel there that will really change the economics of the area.
Congratulations. Thank you for that. And I'm sure we'll learn a lot more about Chula Vista throughout the conversation. Administrator Larrowe.
Lukas, it's a pleasure to be here with you, and always with an elected official. I want to give credence to you, Mayor, and thank you very much for your being involved. And also, I've been to your area, and it's absolutely beautiful. So thank you for all your leadership there. One of the things, Lukas, just as a thoughts also, was that it's Boutetort County, Virginia, and it's Gary Larrowe. It's spelled like Larrowe, but it's pronounced like Larrowe, so French, but got mixed up, I guess, at Ellis Island, maybe somewhere along the way. So anyway, one of the things about Boutetort County, it's interesting, is Boutetort County was one of the largest counties in the nation at one time, actually stretched from where we are now all the way to the Mississippi, covered most of West Virginia, most of Ohio, most of Indiana, part of Michigan, Illinois, and all of Kentucky and all of Tennessee. So what ends up happening is that many people that are probably on the conference today and others actually originated in Boutetort County. We're celebrating our 250th anniversary. Last year it was supposed to be in 2020, so it's 251 years old. So it's an interesting dynamic community. It's rural in nature. Of course, we're very small now compared to what we were at one time. We have about 34,000 residents, and we are in the Roanoke, Virginia metropolitan statistical area. So we're just adjacent to Roanoke, Virginia, Roanoke City, Roanoke County, and so we're right there on Interstate I-81, just north of that community. One of the things that has happened, this is my 16th year as a county administrator in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Prior to that, I worked with Virginia Tech as a faculty member, and using those talents, I guess, if they were God-given talents and experiences, we've been able to actually leverage a lot of that toward economic development in Boutetort County over the past 5 years. It's how long I've been here, 6 years. And one of the things that we did was that we've created a lot of new jobs. Then that ended up needing the creation of new housing. And then that, in combination with the employment, we needed to focus on fiber to the home or to broadband expansion. So we were focusing on this back in 2017, much like the mayor, focusing on things that are really cool now. You were doing things earlier, and we were doing things earlier as well. We were focused on broadband expansion back a long time ago, Lukas. So it's one of the things that sort of a point in time that we were perfectly positioned right now for what was taking place.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I will say I'm from Virginia Beach, Virginia, so I know the Roanoke area well. Have lived there my entire life, except for now living in DC. But thank you both for those descriptions and sort of letting us get to know your communities a little better. And you both have brought up a really good point. And obviously, the bulk of this conversation, we're going to talk about sort of the lessons you all have learned from COVID and some actions that have happened as a result of COVID going forward. But I want to start with both of you sort of in this right before COVID time. I know both of your communities were very active And I want to start with you, Mayor Salas, because you all passed sort of a groundbreaking digital inclusion plan that I know Chula Vista was very proud of. So would you mind walking us through sort of your vision going into that and what that looked like? And you're muted, Mayor Salas.
Yes, so we worked on developing a digital equity plan, and so we had all kinds of stakeholders around the table to assist us with that, and we adopted the plan in May of 2020. So the timing was right, and it was our commitment to not only build out a collaboration between our stakeholders locally here, but regionally, because we've all got to be interconnected. And so we understood that, in order to make sure that we implement and construct the best broadband system ever, that you have to have a plan for it going forward. And so we wanted to make sure that each and every one of our residents would have equal access to the very best and the very fastest service that they could have. And so we were so lucky to be thinking about that just before the pandemic struck, because, when it struck, we understood, the value of that connection to our community. And having done the research on where our challenges were and our opportunities were, we knew where we had to direct our efforts with more intention than in other places, right? And so we knew that there were certain areas within our city that had very poor internet connection. We knew that there were a lot of families that economically they couldn't afford access to the internet. So we worked really, really hard closely with the elementary and the high school district to identify those families that really needed those connections in order to be able to be successful in school, to even get that knowledge that they needed. And so the city used our own resources to purchase over 2,000 Wi-Fi hotspots. And then we turned over those hotspots to the school district in order for them to disperse to the very neediest of their families in order to get them going. The switch from having in-person meetings, not only of the city council, but of our 22 boards and commissions that are very important to the city, that are advisory boards to us. And not only that, help us with, developing civic engagement and developing future leaders for the city of Chula Vista. Those commissions went dark for the longest time because we were figuring out, how does the city council conduct its business virtually and getting connected? And we really had a lot of challenges with that, as we all know, moving to the Zoom and to the Teams and all of that, is that we had a lot of occasions of dropping off, right? Of poor connections where, suddenly you're voting on something and the screen goes blank. And so we met those challenges and we figured out a way for public participation remotely through e-comments and all of that. But we learned so many lessons through that. And we learned that, the services that we had to offer to our community after libraries and parks closed, and how much need that there was in our community, that we deployed our staff in very innovative ways to provide those services to our community. And so the up part of it, the positive part of that closure was that people became more aware of the importance of their local government in providing a quality of life to them. And so that actually expanded civic engagement, civic participation, and that is a plus, because as we know, that kind of civic engagement, because of social media or other things like, homeowner associations or those kinds of things, people were becoming more and more disconnected from their government. So that was a plus part. I don't know if that answered your question. I'm kind of like all over the board. So if I got off track and there's something more specific that you want to know, please let me know.
No, that was fantastic. Thank you. And I'm excited to talk even more about some of the switches and programs that both of you oversaw, especially in those March, April, May months when I think a lot of us didn't really know what was going on. But Administrator Larrowe, I'm curious, I know that your county had invested close to $1 million through partnership with the Virginia Telecommunications Initiative and a few other programs prior to COVID. What was that work looking like leading up to March of 2020?
So, Lucas, it was a blessing for us to have been marching toward this broadband expansion well before we had to. Of course, on March the 16th, the world went crazy. That was the day that we shut our offices down and ended up sending folks home. And so we were working virtually in a lot of that. And then, of course, we had modifications along the way. However, prior to that, we had invested money with the VATI program, which is the Virginia program for throughout the state through the governor's initiatives for broadband expansion. And so we were one of the recipients of that. And so it happened to be that we were able to finish up a project that we were working on with a electric cooperative that serves part of our community. And that project ended up propelling us into the future because we were actually able to finish that one up. That would ended up bringing on 671 homes in an area that is the most challenged part of our community because of the topography and also the distance between homes. So that was fiber to the home of 671 plus about 50 businesses in that area. And that was just absolutely amazing. That was the Craig Boutetort Electric Co-op, and they just did an amazing job of getting that project up and going. So that ended up helping a tremendous amount. At the same time, we ended up helping with some CARES funding that came in. The chairman of the Board of Supervisors happens to be the chair of the Broadband Commission, and his passion, if he is two or more people are gathered together, they're speaking about broadband expansion in Boutetort County. So that's his passion. And Dr. Scott Horn, he ended up pushing us and telling us that we were going to end up spending a tremendous amount of the CARES funding associated with broadband. It happened to be that on March the 16th also, whenever we sent folks home, I was quoted as saying is that if there is anything good that comes out of the COVID, and we didn't know how bad it was going to end up being, but if there was anything good that came out of that, it was going to be the attention placed on broadband expansion. And so we were ahead of the game a little bit, even though in the middle of a sinking ship, as you might think of, is that we were still thinking positively about broadband expansion. So we did end up spending quite a bit of that money. We ended up having about $6.4 million that came into the county, and we spent about $3 million of that on broadband expansion. So about 50% of the effort was going in that direction. So we built out, in one project, we built out 11 miles of backbone fiber that is turned over to our Roanoke Valley Broadband Authority for them to actually contract out the last mile providers. So that ended up taking place. We ended up building out fiber to two locations for, wireless internet access through CBRS radio systems or high bandwidth deployment. And that is still going on right now. And all 500 units will be deployed here very soon is what the intent is for that. We also ended up bought about 500 Chromebooks. That ended up finishing up all kids in grades 5 through 12 as a 1-to-1 ratio with Chromebooks. That created more of a demand for broadband, of course, but it was something that needed to happen to be able to utilize the systems that we were putting in. So then later on, we ended up working with one of the local providers who pushed out more ACAM build out. So they added in about 450 fiber to the home connections in our community. And then we had some it was called Fast Start money from the governor's office, that if you had projects that could be funded, he would end up funding those. And so we leveraged that again and ended up with about $1.4 million for broadband expansion. So we built out another 8 miles or so of fiber for a interconnect. And then that also picked up several people along the way. And that was a very expensive build because we had to go underground the whole way, and to try to get contractors in during a COVID time, trying to get materials in during supply chain issues. It was almost an impossible feat, but we were able to get it done. That provided a redundant circuit for the VATI program, so it leveraged that against itself. And then we ended up building out about 8 miles of other fiber as a backbone that will eventually, right now, matter of fact, it's in the engineering phase right now, to build out to another 600 homes that we could end up having there. So all of that was taking place. And at the same time, we had another electric cooperative on the northern end of the county that was working with Dominion Energy and about the potential of building out 350 homes with fiber to the home. And that project is moving ahead now. We also applied for a second VATI during that same time period. That was the state funding. And we ended up getting that award. So on July 1, just the other day, that project has started. That's going to build out another 548 homes, fiber to the home. So we're getting closer and closer every day toward universal service. And then this past Friday, our governor pushed out a concept, a proposal that he's bringing the General Assembly back together on August the 2nd. His proposal is to spend $700 million of federal ARPA money toward broadband expansion. So we are in a flux of energy right now of actually being able to move forward with developing that program and getting universal service across the county with fiber to the home is what we're really pushing for.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I find it interesting. Both of you brought up a point that, Josh brought up in the last session, and something that we talk a lot about at Next Century Cities, and it's how important these partnerships are internally to your government and with sort of community stakeholders. And I know it's something that when we look back before COVID-19, a lot of these conversations may have been strictly housed in a broadband department or in an IT department or somewhere very niche with people who did it every day. And I'm curious, starting with you, Administrator Larrowe, and then also you, Mayor Salas, you both touched on it, but how integral have those partnerships outside of the broadband office or the IT office become, whether it's been with the school board, like you both mentioned, or sort of other community partners you've engaged? I know we have members who a lot of times will ask, where do I start? Who do I talk to? How do I make this a whole of government approach as opposed to one or two people at a meeting? How important is that? And sort of how were you able to accomplish that during COVID?
That was, you've got to have the partnerships. I mean, there's just no way around it. And also you can't just come in and just create the partnership and then just leave, of course, your long-term partners. So we had already been a member of the Roanoke Valley Broadband Authority prior to this, so we utilized their assets. And as far as a broadband department, we do not have one. You're looking at the broadband department as far as that goes. So this was Gary, if this doesn't get done, then Gary, you're the reason it didn't get done because I'm the one who's doing it. So that was sort of the situation. So county administrator is directing this personally because you've got to look at who has interest, who has some history with this kind of work and things of that sort. So anyway, we pushed forward directly out of my office. And working directly with the superintendent of schools, that was an easy call because the county funds the schools at $56 million. And so I call up the superintendent and I say, hey, can we do this? And of course, he says, yeah, let's do this because it's a wonderful connection because what we were doing was spending CARES funding for the school system, which he said was rare to have actually had that kind of cooperation. But what I was doing was, yes, we were helping the kids, but we were also helping the community by building the need for the broadband system. And so it was hand in glove kind of operation. Same thing with the private providers and the cooperatives. Now what we're doing is negotiating between the cooperatives and the private providers so that universal service can be achieved by open access networks. So the private providers will be running across, potentially, this is what we're trying to get done, private providers would be running across the cooperative fiber as well as the cooperative fiber running across the private networks for open access. That way they don't have to do the overbuilds and still have the cooperation and the competition of delivering services. So that negotiating power of someone in the middle has really proven to be exceptionally valuable, I guess is might end up saying. And flexibility and creativity and how you act and operate. I think those are the key words of today, to be honest.
Mayor Salas, I'm curious what that looked like in Chula Vista. I know you talked about your partnership with the school board, but any tips or thoughts or anything to some of our other members that might be looking for openings to start those partnerships?
Yes, for us, it's really critical that not only that you start those conversations, but that you continue them. And so again, we were very, very fortunate that we had started our digital equity plan process a year before, where we drew in a lot of those partners in order to help us identify the needs, the challenges, and the opportunities. And so, we worked with the business community because that was paramount. Because just like individuals, there are businesses that have more opportunity, more resources than others. Our business community is made up of 99% of our businesses. Our businesses 10 employees or less. And so working with the Economic Development Council, the Chamber, working with the school districts, of course, even the water districts, our regional SANDAG, our COG was really, really paramount. And we continue to do that because I think that we're not as far as advanced as in Gary's area. And we understand that, that broadband, if you don't have that, then as far as economic development you're really behind the curve. And so those are critical to us, and they continue to be a very important part of the discussions that are having, and then the actual implementation of the plan. You can't do it on your own. You really need those partnerships to not only help you identify where you need to be, but to make sure that you're operating in the most efficient way possible.
Thank you. And I appreciate the point you made right there at the end. And I think it's something I want to emphasize again, that without these partnerships, you don't know where you need to be. And I like that you said that, because I know it's something I said this morning during my introduction, but we talk about being in DC and not understanding maybe what's happening at the local level. But I know we hear time and time again from mayors and administrators that you're so right, Mayor Salas, that until you talk to those people, you may think you have an understanding of the problem, but they may give you a completely different perspective that you had missed. So I appreciate you adding that point in. Obviously, the people matter. The people are the most important part, but you both have hit on that a lot of this can't happen without the proper funding. And I know that communities, and sorry, my dog is now up and playing with her toys because she knows that my mic is unmuted. I know that communities were fortunate in sort of an unexpected way this last year with CARES Act funding and the American Rescue Plan Act funding, and some other opportunities that the FCC and Congress have brought forward. But sort of looking at where we are currently and forward, I think we all have seen how critical this funding has been to your plans. But one thing we think about a lot on the Next Century Cities team is how can we keep these funding streams around permanently? How can we make sure that there's money there for these communities to do what they want? So starting with you, Mayor Salas, I'm curious sort of with your digital equity or your digital inclusion plan that you all passed right before COVID, and sort of the funding you've seen during COVID, what do you hope that looks like going forward? Sort of what are your dreams and aspirations for the funding going forward?
Yes, well, certainly that was a major challenge for us, because you can have all the plans that you want, but if you don't have the money to actually get it done, then it's very difficult for that to happen. So we have gotten a great deal of infusion of money for our, through the American Recovery Act, and so we have plans to use that judiciously to help us with the build out of our system. And so, that will be one of the challenges going forward, because it's a finite amount of money. So again, to your point, when you were talking about getting the local perspective, is that I think that Congress opened their eyes to the need for all people to be connected, rural communities as well as urban communities, if you really want a strong and healthy and vibrant and fair economy that lifts all people. And so I'm hoping that wokeness of Congress, realizing that, will really encourage them to look at what our community's doing to make sure that their citizens have the access to something that will strengthen them and in turn strengthen our country and our economy. So it's about using the money wisely, being able to be accountable for the money that you spend, and being able to demonstrate the good that it's done and the benefits that it's brought. And so the job is not complete just because you've got the money and can do it. It's about how do you continue to receive those fundings that you'll need to, build out not only this system, but systems of the future. It's just really critical to a city like Chula Vista that doesn't have a large tax base to utilize our money as best as we can. And what we know is technology makes that happen for you. And one of the great examples of that is that how we utilize technology within our police department, that we are the first police department in the United States to deploy drones as first responders and get that information back to our police officers so that they know what's happening before they arrive on the scene of the call for service, and they're better prepared to handle that situation. And so a lot of your 911 calls may turn out not to be 911 calls and not need a priority, or another one can identify whether or not a person is armed, or those kinds of things, so the proper kind of resources can be deployed. So those systems have helped us improve our response times and provide better services, and that is dependent on all things IT, right? And so I think going forward, all cities will have to work on efficiencies, and that will have to be driven by technology.
Absolutely. And Administrator Larrowe, I'm curious if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, just very quickly, I'm not sure that, we're getting these one-shot infusions of cash which has turned into the second shot of infusion of cash, which may end up turning into an infrastructure bill that could potentially be a third infusion. We're not really sure what will take place with that. But anyway, I think what it really comes down to is how the locality places emphasis on broadband versus some of the ongoing effects. As an example, with our business community, we ended up having business grants for some of our local businesses. But one of the things that we focused in on was how does that help them past not just for perishable goods that they had to replace, but how did they increase their productivity? How did they add an active website for online ordering for a restaurant? Or how did they end up getting point of sale computers put in? How did they get something done that ended up allowing them to be part of the new economy, if you think? So that was one thing. Another thing a lot of people have not really paid much attention to, I think, is the value of fiber to the home will add 3 to 5% to the value of that home. And so whenever we get fully built out, which will not be too far into the future, is what we're hoping for here, then there would end up being a reoccurring revenue stream if it gets captured in the reassessments of those properties, which it will, because the value of those properties are going up on a regular basis. So then you end up having a reoccurring revenue stream for technology advancements. And one of the things that we would love to see is fixed wireless for fire, EMS. We already have monitors in deputies' cars and things of that sort. But what we would love to see are systems that ends up allowing the doctor to be in the ambulance with the patient as the patient's being transported to the hospital, and that they are in remote locations because they have bandwidth to be able to carry that digital signal. And so that more practical applications could end up taking place. So I feel certain that one way to do that is by the increased assessment value of those homes that are associated.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate really the breadth of things that you all have covered, whether it's been improving student outcomes, public safety, economic development. These are things that I know we see in almost every community in every state and territory in Washington, D.C. And I'm curious, sort of in the last 10 minutes we have, if I can take our panel to think big for a moment and think way past the COVID pandemic, hopefully. If you all sort of are able to carry out these plans that you've started, that you've designed, and you're able to sort of get your universal access out and are able to sort of keep this momentum going where you have high adoption in your communities, thinking big, what would that almost universal access and high adoption transform about your community in 5 or 10 years? Or ideally, what would you hope to see as the great outcome of, we have achieved our universal access goals and I can now say this about my community? And if either of you want to chime in.
I would love to see a healthier community because of telehealth, that they could end up having. You think about modernization and use of technology so that people could actually monitor their health from their homes, from everyday life. That might end up being very, very positive. Also, the same thing for education. Education never really stops. And so education, remote education could be something that could really be pushed in a community, and about developing the workforce with specific attributes for specific needs. The other thing too that I see us really pushing for is the remote worker. And there are so many folks throughout the nation that can work anywhere. And especially now they figured out that they can end up working anywhere. So I could end up seeing us being a haven of that because of our outdoor amenities and the culture that we end up having in our communities. So that will be a huge attraction point for us, I think, in the future. And whenever I'm on one aisle of the grocery store and I hear someone speaking on the other aisle about how wonderful this community is because they have broadband access, would be the epitome of conversations that I could hear. Just overhearing someone talking about that and understanding the availability of whether it is might be church services online, or it might be education online, healthcare online, emergency services, protecting the officers, protecting fire, EMS, helping them in any way. All of that put together is what we're looking at for the future.
And Gary, I think that will happen. I think it's inevitable that it will happen. That's our future. And as far as, expanding on that dream, is that wherever any resident of our community goes, they'll have full internet access. They don't have to park themselves at a Starbucks to, do their homework or anything like that. That it will be free internet access and open data for everyone. So I think that we're on our way. I think that the pandemic really shed the light on that. I know that I'm getting some of my medical information and services online now. I know that we will continue to have some of our regional meetings transpire online because it really is efficient. Actually, it creates more work for me because I can pack in more meetings than before. So I think that we will continue to see as this expands and that everyone can be connected and we'll see the benefits of being connected. I think it will make us a stronger community in the future.
Well, thank you for that. And I will cross my fingers, and I know that everyone on this call listening, participating, I'm sure are going to join you both in that fight to hopefully get to that dream that we painted. I sort of in these last couple minutes want to thank you both for joining us, and thank you both for your leadership to your communities over the last 18 months, and to all of the elected, appointed, career officials, volunteer officials, everyone who sort of serves in any capacity to lead their community. I know the last 18 months have been difficult, but Mayor Salas and Administrator Larrowe, I think you both have outlined a very optimistic vision for what comes next. A conversation I know we have a lot on the Next Century Cities team is keeping up the momentum, keeping up the interest, making sure that Congress and the Virginia General Assembly and the California Assembly and all of the state houses and state governors, keep investing, because we have seen at the local level in your communities and elsewhere what money and interest can do, and it can drive some amazing innovation and partnerships. So I really thank you both for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. And I know that we look forward to continuing to highlight your work in Virginia and California. And we really look forward to hearing from you all again in the near future. Hopefully in 5 or 10 years, we can circle back on this conversation and say, look, we did it. We have a healthier, happier, more connected community. So thank you both so much for joining us. And up next, I'm very excited to introduce another panel as we sort of continue the COVID conversation.